There's a lot of terrible stuff that happens under color of law. So it's important to think for yourself where you stand. If the law said X, would it still be the ethical thing to follow the law? Or would it be the ethical thing to subvert the law?
Technology as a whole is engulfed in what may prove to be a permanent moral crisis. And the best place to turn for wisdom on how to handle it is the people who have been through this before, whether they serve in giant companies or startups, nonprofits, or Congress. Joseph Menn. Let's face it, the dark web gets, well, dark. The hackers and hacktivists of the world don't often like their work to come into the light. Some reasons are for good, some are gray, and some are black. But at the same time, some of these hackers are the paragon of moral ethics. So how do we cut through the noise, the aliases, and the secrecy of these underground worlds? In today's episode, we chat with the master about how. The expert and chronicler of this world is Joseph Menn. Joe is the author of several books about these worlds. His most recent is called Cult of the Dead Cow, about the most notorious hacking supergroup of all time. Today, we discuss the work and stories behind Joe's books. We talk about the recent good that hackers in the COVID crisis are doing. Many of these hacktivists are coming to the aid of overworked hospital infrastructures who are being held up by ransomware. Plus, we talk about the ethics and infrastructure needed in a world increasingly being dominated and run by technology. The stakes are high, and Joe's words sum it up best. The more powerful machines become, the sharper human ethics have to be. If the combination of mindless, profit-seeking algorithms, dedicated geopolitical adversaries, and corrupt U.S. opportunists over the past few years has taught us anything, it is that serious applied thinking is a form of critical infrastructure. The best hackers are masters of applied thinking, and we cannot afford to ignore them. Likewise, they should not ignore us. We need more good in the world. If it can't be lawful, then let it be chaotic. Joseph Menn.
This season of Hidden in Plain Sight is brought to you exclusively by our friends at Splunk, the Data to Everything platform. Splunk helps organizations worldwide turn data into doing. It's time for data to be more than a record of what happened. It's time to make things happen. Learn more at Splunk.com or by clicking the link in our show notes.
Joe, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Where are you calling in from today?
I'm in San Francisco at home.
Very cool. And we talked a little bit about your quarantine challenges, and I'm glad to hear you and everyone around you are doing okay. And it's been a challenging time, but it's also been a time of information that's, coming out at an increasing rate. And I was hoping to get your take on some of the things that we're seeing, as well as just hearing more about your story and your work, which is fascinating. So welcome back to the show.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. There have been a lot of sort of good guy hackers involved in trying to help deal with the crisis in a variety of ways. It's actually been really encouraging and nice to see.
What type of examples of that hacktivism or the good guy hacking, the white hat stuff are you seeing out there?
Well, there are a few. So one of them is there is a sort of a coalition of volunteers working specifically on COVID-related hacking. So it's called the COVID CITL, Counterintelligence Threat League, or something like that. So they were worried about hackers trying to take advantage of, the worst example would be hospitals. They're not tech whizzes. Most, hospitals don't have big, IT staffs, let alone security staff. So they were worried, the security folks were worried that hackers would look at hospitals that are maxed out right now taking care of patients and choose this time to lock up their stuff with ransomware. And so what they did is they said, we're not going to charge anybody anything, but if we see any hackers going after critical infrastructure that is a part of the response to COVID, we're going to come down with no mercy. Everybody's going to volunteer. It's like a kind of like a posse sort of a situation from the American West. And they're going to not only protect the institutions, but they're going to do everything they can to nail the individuals. And they're going to work law enforcement in multiple countries. They're gonna do stuff like that. And so that's been their sort of biggest mission. They've hundreds and hundreds of people behind it. This guy named Mark Rogers, whose day job is at a security company in San Francisco called Okta. But he is probably best known in the hacker community for being head of security at DEF CON, which is the largest hacker conference in the world, and is, everybody tries to hack DEF CON itself for bragging rights. It's like an open field thing. It's like a very dangerous thing, and he's the head of security there, so he's extremely well known. And so he's one of the organizers.
Very cool. And you mentioned Posse, and I think what's fascinating about so many of these hackers and hacktivists is that they understand the law of numbers and they form groups. So whether it's groups of 2 like Legion of Doom or groups of many like the Cult of Dead Cow, could you tell us a little bit more about how these groups are formed and how big they are in size to kind of paint that picture?
Sure. Like you said, there's quite a range. There are, they're very small groups. There are still like solo hackers that do some impressive stuff. Sometimes there's a group that pretends to be one person. There's a very well-known hacktivist still out there, whose mask has not dropped yet, named Phineas Fisher. And I don't think anybody believes that Phineas Fisher is one person. It's a bunch of people. We don't know, whether, in my book, which is primarily about Cult of the Dead Cow and other hacktivists that they inspired, and they may be actually a Russian intelligence front. What they say is that it's one person who's an anarchist. Who knows? But there are groups that sort of ebb and flow. The granddaddy is Cult of the Dead Cow, and they've had maybe 50 members over its lifetime, which goes back 35 years. Never more than about 20 active at once. So people cycle in, people cycle out. And sort of it reflects the zeitgeist and sometimes leads the underground security zeitgeist a bit. So sometimes they're leaning one way, sometimes they're leaning another way. Anonymous, is infinite, right? There are thousands of people, most of whom just did a little, and they joined for one given operation, as they call them, an op. And but there's sort of like core group. I guess in the sort of like the dozens. And one of the interesting thing about Anonymous going back is that like most of the people in it aren't very technical. The ones who are among the best formed this group that came to be known as Lull Security, or LulSec. And they went on this sort of like performance art Bonnie and Clyde spree where they went so far as to take requests. What should we hack next? They got broken up by the feds in the UK and the US. This is about 10 years ago, but they had quite a run. Other groups, 10 or 20 is kind of normal, but there are not that many that are about like sort of this really sort of broad political perspective, like the Cult of the Dead Cow is. For that these days, you can join the EFF, or if you're more just a coder, you can join some open source project. You can, you can be the tech person at a nonprofit. There are people who are rooting for the Democrats who have their own sort of technical squad that'll go out and help a given campaign. There are lots of ways to get involved now, and it's kind of rare that you have these old groups. There are some. And let me give you a couple examples of other people that have been involved in the COVID stuff. One is, if you recall, at least in the beginning, there are extreme shortages, not just of masks, but ventilators and things like that. And there are a lot of sort of people from the maker movement or the maker mindset that did amazing things. Not just, there's a lot of 3D printing of face masks, so not the surgical things, but the more like a welder might have. And that was actually face shields, I think they're called. And that was actually super useful for frontline people in the hospitals that were not getting enough personal protective equipment. And then there are some fancier folks that were designing and open sourcing ventilators, where there's also a huge shortage. and there was thought to be a worse shortage in the beginning in the U.S. And then there are folks that unlocked CPAP machines that help people with apnea. They broke through the protections and made it so that they could be modified and turned into a ventilator that would actually be more useful for a patient with COVID. So there's all sorts of stuff that's like that going on. And then the last thing I'll mention in this sort of this activist vein versus COVID is that there are attempts to figure out how the virus is put together. There's a big project that involves folding proteins and to see how this works. And that takes basically an almost infinite amount of CPU time. So the way that people used to voluntarily turn over the processing power of their home computers as part of the SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence at Home project, SETI at Home it was called. They went to bed at night, their computer would still be going, helping scan the universe for signals. That project ended a year or two ago after a 20-year run, I think. But people have been donating processing time to a number of folding efforts in terms of analyzing the virus that causes COVID. And one of the biggest contributors, I'd say top 200 contributors, is a group of old school hackers called Root, R00T. And Root has been around about 20 years and is basically all the old guard hackers. So the members of the Cult of the Dead Cow, members of the Ninja Strike Force, which is kind of a larger auxiliary group affiliated with CDC, the Loft, the great Boston hacking space, Woo Woo, another old school group that included Sean Fanning, the founder of Napster, and Doug Song, the founder of Duo Security, which got sold for a couple $2 billion to Cisco a couple years ago. Also Jan Koum, who was a co-founder of WhatsApp, is also in Woo Woo. So that's another big contributor to the Root folding team.
That's fascinating. And I think that these large macro challenges that society's facing are going to have to be, open sourced more to these smaller communities of helpers. And there are a number of examples that you cite in Cult of the Dead Cow about the federal agencies working together more with hacktivists. How do you see this genesis happening of hacktivists starting to coordinate more with formal institutions? How has that evolved over the course of your journalistic career?
That's really interesting. So if you go back, there was real animosity between federal authority and the hackers because in 1986, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act made so much illegal that hadn't been previously considered illegal. Unauthorized use of a computer, and that doesn't mean necessarily you taking over my computer. It could mean, according to the federal interpretation, that you signed a terms of service, or you clicked on I agree, and then you did something that was beyond what that click wrap is that nobody ever actually reads. That could be considered a crime. They used the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act to get real criminals, but they also used it to go after people that didn't, out of proportion to the harms that they caused. Aaron Schwartz being a famous example of that. He was just downloading scientific journals and making them available for free, which is against the law, but he was looking at more than 10 years behind bars when tragically he killed himself. So there's been this historic animosity since the 80s, since the late 80s. But the trick was that back then, if you wanted to turn pro, you wanted to go from an amateur hacker to trying to make a living in security, there weren't a lot of places to do that. There are now, but there weren't then. So some started working with the FBI, and they were sort of shunned by the hacker community. And I go through this in the sort of my history of the cult of the dead cow. There's sort of this compromise that emerged, and probably the leading practitioner was Mudge, whose real name is Peter Zatko. He is kind of a legendary hacker. Had worked on security stuff way back, but also traveled in circles that had plenty of criminals in it. And Mudge, who went on to lead DARPA's cybersecurity efforts, the folks that brought you the internet in the first place, and also did special projects at Google and has done all sorts of good things. His compromise was, look, I'm not going to deal with the FBI because they're going to want me to name names, but I will help the intelligence agencies, NSA in particular, CIA and others. I'm rooting for my country more than other countries, and they should know what's doable and what's not. What's somebody just trying to sell them lots of stuff. That was Mudge's compromise. Others in the CDC wouldn't have anything to do with the government. That's a route many have taken. So they work with the intelligence agencies, not so much with law enforcement. Now it's sort of easier. There are multiple channels into law enforcement, and there is overlap. There are people with these groups do talk to the FBI, but it would more typically be about something like going after hackers that are hurting the hospitals. Maybe organized crime overseas, but not helping catch people within the U.S. There's still great sensitivity around that kind of thing.
Sure. And I think what is really cool about your work, so your first book was on Napster, where you were kind of alerted to a lot of these trends via the fact that, when we talk about Napster, often we think about like the bad guys, when in reality you found a bunch of folks who were trying to ring the alarm bells. And then in your next book, Fatal System Error, you were again it was basically like a dire warning about what was going on. Whereas Cult of the Dead Cow, you say, is a more hopeful look at the future and at some of the trends that you see. With everything going on out there and just the world of hacking in general, how do you parse out the most hopeful messages from it? And what are they?
One is that it's a lot easier now to do good than it used to be. When the Cult of the Dead Cow came along, there weren't very many jobs to be had in security. And what jobs there were, somewhere buried inside a big company doing, minor iterations of Norton antivirus or McAfee or something like that, which, help, but really don't stop, serious hackers at all. And in some ways can actually be, used as a tool by the bad guys. So there wasn't a lot that could be done. Now there's a lot more. As I said, there's nonprofits. There's there are sort of mainstream non-technical places that realize that they need technical help, including security. There's straight political work, of course, like the most amazing anecdote in the Cult of the Dead Cow book is the fact that one of them grows up to run for president of the United States, Beto O'Rourke having been a member in the first years of the Cult of the Dead Cow. So there's people, I think another hopeful thing is that society as a whole doesn't see hackers as uniformly bad anymore. Hacker used to be this terrible pejorative. It meant that you were a criminal. And you're probably unkempt and possibly 300 pounds in a basement bedroom. Hackers can be seen as good guys now in a variety of ways. And actually, Sean Fanning, the Napster founder, member of WooWoo, fellow traveler of CDC, was the first, I think, cool hacker. There's Bill Gates from sort of like a business perspective. But Sean Fanning was this likable teenager that brought free music to the masses and was on the cover of Time magazine. Maybe the older generation disapproved. Napster got shut down for massive copyright violations. But I think kids are like, hey, that's pretty cool. I'd like to do something like that. Maybe something more legal, but something important. So I think that's a hopeful thing. So there's more avenues to do good with hacking. And there's more receptiveness on the part of the public. I think those are good things. And then as a practical matter, they've already done so much good. So they have helped, catch some serious bad guys. They've definitely helped companies improve their products. Groups like the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which are closely linked with hackers in the good sense, have fought for civil liberties, or against mass surveillance, against company practices that are not appreciated by many of their users. And the battles are all over the place. I mean, it's sometimes it's the governments that are doing bad things, tracking everybody, particularly in other countries. Sometimes it's big companies that are doing questionable things. But there's a lot more awareness of the issues, and that is brought to people often through these civil liberty groups that are sort of powered by hackers. They're like sort of not just technical hackers, but sort of policy hackers and people who analyze all sorts of systems, looking for holes and problems and flaws and bringing them to light.
Sure. And Joe, when you are thinking about the future of getting younger people kind of like aware of these topics and maybe showing them different pathways to get involved, whether career pathways or just starting to hack a bit at home, are there any movements or are there any examples where you think that this is being done the right way, where it's being done in a voluntary way?
Sure. I mean, the easiest thing to do is go to DEF CON, because DEF CON, while enormous, is still old school, and has there's not a lot of for-profit stuff happening there. There aren't like a bajillion trade booths, recruiting booths or whatever, and there are a lot of people that are kind of do-it-yourselfer types who will try and will pitch their open source project. Probably an even better, more idealistic one is a conference in New York called Hackers on Planet Earth, or HOPE, which goes back to the 90s and is run by the same people that publish 2600, the great old school hacker publication. So that's every couple of years in New York. DEF CON, much larger, every year, possibly including this one in Las Vegas in the summer. But one could look at past talks at HOPE, could listen to them. Civil liberties oriented, other sort of worthy projects. Like there are things like mesh networking. There are all sorts of things like protecting dissidents. The Tor project allows people to communicate with less government, less chance of government interception, and that's can be very, very important depending on what you're working on and where and with whom.
Sure. And when it comes to political leaders, you mentioned Beto O'Rourke, and whether it's congressmen or senators, what congressmen and senators or mayors or really anybody do you see out there that is appropriately informed about the nature of cyber threats and cyberspace?
Tech is now underpinning virtually everything, and security sort of underpins tech. So security is kind of like the hard core of it all, which is why I think it's so important and so interesting. So it is hard to, one of the reasons that not a lot of great stuff has been done in cybersecurity out of Congress is that there are something like 20 committees that could literally have a claim to jurisdiction over some aspect, commerce stuff, criminal justice stuff, intelligence stuff. It's all of those things, right? So that makes it very hard. There are people that are very good at one issue, but not others. The first guy that comes to mind, though, is Ron Wyden, senator from Oregon, who has been, is on the Intelligence Oversight Committee, and it takes oversight seriously and has serious technical staff. One of his staffers is Chris Soghoian, who had been the staff technologist at the ACLU, a technical thinker. Wyden took what came out of the Snowden revelations and has pushed for reforms in a number of areas. One is what he calls backdoor searches. So this is still coming out, but the federal wiretap structure allows interception of American conversations if the main purpose is to try and get a foreign operation caught. And unfortunately, what has been happening is that what Wyden called backdoor searches, where instead of throwing it out, they'd scoop up conversations that involved Americans, and then sometimes they would search, the FBI would search that database for stuff for ordinary criminal investigations. And they wouldn't do it with enough checks. Yeah, this is sort of being gradually exposed in one way or another. So Wyden has been a big deal. There are other people with technical backgrounds now and savvy in Congress. One of them I mentioned in the book is a Republican from Texas. But, one thing that's changed is that, before 2016, I think tech was by and large seen as a good thing, tech writ large, big tech. They're great for the economy. Everybody likes being able to, find their old high school friends on Facebook. It's pretty cool being able to have a supercomputer in your pocket in the form of the iPhone. Now, many people from across the political spectrum are down on tech. And that includes many people who work in tech. The sort of rank and file movement in Silicon Valley now is completely, I've been covering Silicon Valley for more than 20 years now. It's never happened before. There's never been this sort of workforce opposition to things that their companies are doing. And that's really interesting. And that is totally the heritage of Cult of the Dead Cow and the hacktivists, and something that's being carried forward now. Yesterday or the day before, vice president of Amazon quit because Amazon has been firing people who've been active in coordinating protests over safety in the warehouses as well as on climate issues. And he gave a big public blog post explaining, why he couldn't work for Amazon anymore, despite it having been a great job. All of that stuff is happening now. And so even if you work for a big company, you can effectively work from within. Google employees got the company to stop supplying artificial intelligence for targeting of autonomous weapons. Pretty much, some Facebook employees have pushed the company to stop accepting false political advertising, though it hasn't worked yet. There are all sorts of things going on that I think are super cool.
Yeah, and I think that one of the best ways to think about these issues is based on a mental model that Song, the person you mentioned, Doug Song, who sold his company to Cisco, he says, or you say about his model here, rather than thinking about the world as binary, good or evil, Song said he found it helpful to think of the Matrix in the role-playing game Dungeons & Dragons with one axis running from good to evil and another one running from lawful to chaotic. This is immensely helpful as we think about a world where, a la cyberspace, where the laws are being written in real time. So there's going to be, it's an emergent system. There's going to be chaos. There's going to be laws that have not yet been written. And we're going to need to be able to tolerate a little bit of that chaos. Could you tell us a little bit about that matrix and maybe how it informed your thought process on thinking of these issues?
There are a few things that are super important about Cult of the Dead Cow and others they've inspired that they have in common. So one is, probably the most important, I think, is critical thinking. The ability to look at something, stand apart from it, and really think about what you know about it, what's knowable, without relying on just sort of, some random influencer on Instagram. So thinking seriously, rigorously about stuff. We kind of have a worldwide shortage of that, and hackers are great examples of doing that, because by nature, all serious hackers are critical thinkers. They're looking at structures and figuring out things that are wrong with them, especially if they're using them as they're not as intended to be used. The second is one or more moral cause. Some of the people are, could be anti-government, some could be pro-civil rights, some could care more about the environment, but there's some kind of moral drive somewhere in there. And the last is adaptability. The ability to CDC started out as writing funny text files and wound up being these critical forces in sort of global issues of surveillance and democracy. So the ability to keep changing the playing field, or keep up as the playing field changes, but hold on to your earlier values, is super important. kids grow up thinking that, you're a criminal or a cop. You follow the law or you don't, and you're good if you follow the law. Maybe that's, largely true, but it's not always true. Hitler came to power legally. He was elected. There's a lot of terrible stuff that happens under color of law. And so Doug Song gives the example of Darth Vader. Darth Vader isn't breaking the law. He's just evil. So it's important to think for yourself where you stand. If the law said X, would it still be the ethical thing to follow the law, or would it be the ethical thing to subvert the law? And people come down in different places, and they're certainly within hackerdom. There are lots of examples. In particularly the early days, I think unlawful, chaotic was pretty much the norm. And people, I talked to a lot of the really old guard who left hacking and security as far back as the 80s, and they many of them still have that mindset. Don't really care much about the law. Don't actually care that much about advancing moral causes. They just sort of like messing with stuff. The difference with the CDC and the hacktivists and people involved in security today, the really good ones, is that they kind of morally evolved. Once everybody got online and they realized how much was at stake, they realized that they had to sort of level up morally and do more good for more people. So even if they feel like they're sort of anti-establishment, a business is a good way to distribute stuff that actually helps people be more secure. So a number of the old CDC guys and people around them now work for Apple. They help make the iPhone more secure, which helps a lot of people. There are others that work for Google. There is good stuff to be done in all of these companies and in government and as an outside agitator, all these different ways. Whether your personal style is to, always follow the law, or whether it's to ignore the laws completely, there is a place for people to do good and important, helpful work.
Yeah, and I think that another follow-on quote that you have here is, the more powerful machines become, the sharper human ethics have to be. This is something that I think is paramount to start discussing now and start getting into school curriculum, because we have all these emerging technologies and we don't have a lot of conversations going on ethics and teaching children or college students about ethics and applied thinking. What type of curriculum or conversations would you like to see going on more at schools about this stuff?
So there are two things. The one that's sort of top of mind, and I was thinking about when I wrote those words, is artificial intelligence, because a lot of this is machine learning driven, and it can institutionalize bad stuff. So, for example, there's been predictive policing stuff where the LAPD or whomever will send more patrols into a given area because they historically had more reports of crime from that area. But maybe that's because that place was over policed in the beginning. There are lots of really scary examples of people saying, "Hey, the computer produced this," for example, recommendation that somebody get a longer prison sentence because they're more likely to reoffend, and then it turns out that that's based on garbage data. There was a case like this in Florida, and shockingly, the computer kept saying these black defendants were more likely to reoffend, so they should get longer sentences, and they didn't. It was completely wrong. The thing that I really call out is case studies. A real company faced this challenge. This is what they did. What have others in a real life business or government situation done? And what should have happened instead? That should really be more widely adopted in schools.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, the case study format is fascinating to spark conversation and critical thinking. Joe, is there anything that you'd like to leave our listeners with? Is there anything that's on your radar that is, you think, going to be a major discussion point in the next couple of months? What are you looking at now, and what are you thinking?
So a big issue is, everybody's right now, people are thinking about COVID more than anything. And the surveillance and that's involved in trying to stop it. I mean, surveillance also has a technical meaning for epidemiology. You want to keep track of the population to see who's getting ill. And then there's contact tracing, which is, who else have they been in touch with, so you can warn them to get tested and isolate before they spread it further. So this is a very live issue as we speak. Apple and Google, in a very rare development, got together and came up with apps, a framework for apps that would work on Android or the iPhone that would allow various public entities to do contact tracing. And the way it basically works is you opt in, you download this app if you want to, and it uses Bluetooth or other means to figure out what other phones you were in proximity to without learning their names. And then if you test positive, you can ask your doctor or another official to confirm that you're positive and send out something that will automatically notify the people that you're in contact with, a certain number of minutes, certain number of feet, and say, hey, you might want to get tested. You were in contact, you were in the same area as somebody, without saying who that person was. What's interesting is that governments around the world now are by and large falling into line with what Apple and Google wanted. They wanted names. They wanted the ability to keep Bluetooth on in the background, which would mean that they would get pure location data instead of just if somebody turns positive, and would be less voluntary. It's gray, but that's the way we're going. So far, the UK, as we talk today, the UK and France are still pushing for something like that. Germany had been, but they sort of fell into line. So Apple and Google, and the sort of engineering tech heads behind those companies are actually preserving privacy against those governments. So that's super interesting, and an example of how the tech ethics flow out and influence hundreds of millions of people. So it's only going to get more important as tech gets more important, tech security and privacy gets more important, and ethics get more important. So whatever your relation to technology is now, it would behoove people to bone up on this stuff. And Story of the Gulf to the Dead Cow, about to be out in paperback, is a fun way to do it.
Couldn't agree more. Wise words, Joe. Thanks so much for joining us, and to everyone listening, we'll see you next time.
I'm Sophia Bush, and you've been listening to Hidden in Plain Sight from Mission.org. This podcast is sponsored by our friends at Splunk, the Data to Everything platform. In today's data-driven world, every company, big or small, new or old, is sitting on terabytes of unused, untapped, and unknown data. Splunk helps turn all that data into action. Using cutting-edge AI and machine learning, Splunk delivers real-time predictive insights that will help you on your mission to change the world. With solutions for IT, security, Internet of Things, and business operations, Splunk empowers people to make faster, better decisions and take action to get things done. It's time for our data to be more than a record of what happened. It's time to make things happen.